Hello folks, my name is John Tannett with the 12 News Digital Team, and I'm joined here today by Steve Schumacher, our official Phoenix City historian. So Steve, with Phoenix History Month kind of upon us, I wanted to go into some of the weird little fun facts about the city that most people don't know. So getting started with stuff, Phoenix wasn't always going to be named Phoenix, was it? Yeah.
Oh no. The first choices, there were several that were first choices. One being Pumpkinville, which gives most people a little bit of a chuckle when they think about having to write that as an address or return address. But there was a couple others, Stonewall for Stonewall Jackson. Jack Swilling, the founder of Phoenix, was part of the Confederate Army. But yeah, Pumpkinville, because there was all kinds of gourds and pumpkins around the area that when they first started digging the canals.
So with a lot of these pumpkins right here, that wasn't originally the center of Phoenix, was it?
Oh gosh, no. No, actually what we know as Phoenix today, which is typically Central and Washington, is what we think of with the core of downtown. That was actually the fourth choice, John. Had the early pioneers been successful, what we know as Phoenix today would be where Tempe is. So this, what we know as Phoenix, was the fourth choice of the pioneers.
So what made that Tempe, quote unquote, location so preferable? Why was that their first option?
Well, it was closer to the river, the Salt River, and it was more navigable than some of the other spots. There weren't any bridges, so they had to find a shallow location to be able to cross the river. Unfortunately, they encountered a big wall of rock, some kind of limestone, and they didn't quite have the necessary explosives to get through it. So they just moved down the river. But their first choice was right by Tempe.
So it was that big rock face that really pushed us a little further west to where we now think of as downtown Phoenix?
Exactly.
So you mentioned that was fourth choice. That seems pretty far down the list. What?
Yeah, the second choice, they decided to move down the river to dig the first canal. That was what they were trying to do, find a location for the canal. The second choice, which Jack Swilling and some of his group chose, was right around 36th Street in Washington. Jack Swilling actually built a huge house in hopes that that area would become Phoenix and the county seat and the capital. And it didn't work out that way. But the next choice, they moved a little bit further down about where St. Luke's Hospital is, right off of Van Buren. And then the pioneers, the farmers got together again, and they actually had a vote of all the citizens that were in the area, and they chose this area that we know as downtown Phoenix today.
So that one was a pretty big communal decision, but I understand that the name Phoenix was only chosen by about 20 or so people, right?
Well, the name was originally just brought up and proposed by a British lord by the name of Darrell Dupa. He's in most corners, he's credited with giving Phoenix its name. And to me, it's a beautiful, the name is beautiful, but the origin of it, when you think about Phoenix, we are built today upon the ruins of the Huhugam indigenous community. If you know the mythology of the phoenix bird would die, it would burn, and from the ashes a new phoenix would grow. And that's exactly what Darrell Dupa was proposing, that we, the Anglo pioneers, were going to be growing upon an ancient community started by the Huhugam.
Interesting. And I know Phoenix used to have a little more of a tribute to some of the local tribes that were in the area with the street names, right?
Right.
Yeah, what we now think of as just numbers used to be very different.
They were very different. The north-south street names, which like you said we know as Central, First Avenue, First Street, etc., were originally, with two exceptions, named after Indian tribes, Pima, Maricopa. The two exceptions was First Avenue and First Street. First Avenue was named Cortez, and First Street was named Montezuma. Neither one of those were Indian tribes. And then about 1893, as Phoenix had become an incorporated city, was growing and growing, people were complaining that they couldn't remember the street names of Indian tribes, so they changed the numbers. People could remember first, second, third, so forth.
Well, now I have that problem with all of the east to west streets, so I think a grid of numbers might be pushing our luck a little bit.
Right.
Now, I think there was one more that didn't change, because Central has always been Central, right?
Well, it actually, if you get into the nitty-gritty detail, the original Central was Center, C-E-N-T-R-E, and then it was changed to Center, C-E-N-T-E-R, and then, it was changed to Central along with the other street names in the early 1890s.
And it's kind of crazy to think of how much Phoenix has grown from these initial, I mean, it was close to only 7 streets in either direction off Central, right?
Right.
Very early on. And I mean, now we have in the 500s out to the West Valley and into the upper 200s in the East. Pretty crazy to see how far the city has come since then.
Yeah, when you think about the original town site, which was surveyed and platted and lots were sold, it was only 1 mile by a half a mile, and it was bordered by Van Buren and the train tracks and 7th Avenue and 7th Street. That was the original town site. So from there to go into the 500s in the west and all the way out Scottsdale Road in the east, it's pretty amazing.
It's a pretty big achievement, honestly. It really is. Well, Steve, before I let you go here, any other little fun facts or kind of niche things about the city that you think people should know more about?
Well, a lot of people characterize Phoenix. Phoenix has always been associated with growth. That's a word, and some people would say sprawl as a negative type term, but Phoenix has always been associated with growth since day one. But up until World War II, it was still a pretty small farming community, and it wasn't even as big as Topeka, Kansas, up till World War II. It was about the same size as Walla Walla, Washington, and Emporia, Kansas. But when World War II came around, that was where the boom happened after World War II, and the city of Phoenix grew population-wise 400% right after that. So. Phoenix has always been associated with growth, but for the majority of the years, it was a small farming community, really.
In some ways, it's a very ancient city, and in a lot of ways, it's a very new one.
Yes, it is. Yep.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. For more on the history of Phoenix, you can check out more of our work online at 12news.com.
Hey, everyone. Digital producer Gabe Trujillo here. And if you didn't know, March is Phoenix History Month. So I'm here with official historian Steve Schumacher to talk to some of the most historical places here in the Valley. Steve, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, Gabe. Thanks for asking.
No problem. Now, to get things started, I want us to talk about the Orpheum Theater. You had mentioned its historical significance.
Oh, yes. Well, Phoenix, in a lot of its early years, were trying to draw investors and more money into the valley. I think it's pretty much the same way today to help Phoenix grow. And one of the things that the city decision makers felt was needed was an ornate theater. And so a guy named Harry Nace and his partner, Rickards was his last name, they built the Orpheum Theater in 1929. And it's just incredibly ornate. It went through a bunch of years, down years, and then the city stepped in, renovated it, and it is just a crown jewel of Phoenix today.
Interesting. Now, I am a paranormal enthusiast, so that's where I get most of my knowledge about the Orpheum Theater. Now, is it really a good ghost story?
Well, I know a number of the people that are on the that work there and run it, and they're pretty convinced. They talk about a female spirit that is in the balcony. Her name is Maddie. You probably heard then. And it's claimed that she actually will whisper in people's ears to tell them to be quiet. She actually slapped the guy once and he turned around, nobody was there. So in the world of the paranormal and ghost sightings and so forth, at least as far as Phoenix is concerned, the Orpheum is right up near the top.
Interesting. Now, going from a theater to train stations, you mentioned Union Station. Now, I know there's a Union Station in New York, but I didn't realize there was that big of a train station here in the Valley.
Well, there is, and Phoenix struggled in its growth in the early years because we didn't have any trains, and everything that was brought in by wagons and freight and those kinds of things. So it limited how we could build different structures because wood was too expensive to bring in, and we didn't have a brick factory at the time. So most, if not all, of the structures were made from adobe. And then in 1887, that all changed when the first train came into town. And then in 1895, both the northern branch of trains and the southern met. And in 1923, Union Station was built. And that changed the whole landscape of both shipping goods out and bringing goods in. And I like to characterize our Union Station as it was the Sky Harbor of its time. Anybody and everybody that came to Phoenix or through Phoenix went through Union Station.
Now, when you think of Union Station, New York immediately comes to my mind.
Sure.
How big was the station here compared to the one in New York?
Oh, well, it's minuscule compared to Grand Central Station in New York, because we really only had about 7 regular passenger trains, 7 to 9 that came through, where I don't know how many are in New York City, but it's got to be more than that. But Phoenix is, when in 1923, Phoenix was not very big, so it served the needs of the residents just fine at that time.
Now, in downtown Phoenix, you can see the growth that's just currently going on here locally. And one of the interesting landmarks is Heritage Square. You said that that was a pretty big historical significance here for Phoenix. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, one of the structures that's at Heritage Square is called the Rawson House, and was built by a physician in town named Dr. Rawson. And it's another example of how the Phoenix decision makers were trying to encourage home building that was large and ornate, because the Rawson House still today is a beautiful example of Victorian architecture. So that is still a place that people can go to and tour, and it's got a lot of period clothing in there, as well as desks and furniture and beds. So it's quite a landmark today. In addition to that, one of the earliest of pioneers in Phoenix was a guy by the name of John Y.T. Smith, and he had a home there at Heritage Square. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, but it was right there in that Heritage Square mix with all the old homes, and especially the Rawson House. It's a real landmark.
So just to think that Heritage Square was an area filled with homes, and now it's right in the middle of a bustling downtown district.
It is. It is. It was, when you think about when all that, well, the Rawson House was built in 1895, and at that time, if you just stepped out of the eastern side of that house and crossed 7th Street, you were out of town. Because 7th Street at that time was the eastern border of the town site. So it was right on the outside of town.
Interesting. Now, of all the different historical places here in the valley, a lot of things come together, like libraries, buildings, but you mentioned Phoenix Union High School.
Oh,
How does a high school have such a historical significance for a town?
Well, again, Phoenix has always been associated with growth. The very first school was where the Hotel San Carlos is today. The very first one-room adobe dirt floor school. And then, of course, Phoenix started growing, so another one was built, and then that was expanded. And then finally they realized we need a much bigger property to accommodate all of these students. So in the mid-1890s, the state, I think it was the Attorney General, a guy named Clark Churchill, had built a huge mansion right near 7th Street in Van Buren, just not far from here. And he passed away soon after it was built, and his wife, who was still living, sold it to the city of Phoenix as the original high school. And of course that ran out of space pretty quickly. So in the early 1910s, they built additional buildings and a large football stadium that could accommodate 14,000 people. So that high school is a shining example of how the city decision makers had to scramble around to meet the demands of growth, which in that case was school children.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting to learn more about like the education and how that's evolved along with all these historical landmarks here in the valley. Now, when you think about history in Phoenix, you have to think about the Native American culture and its impact into the community. You mentioned in one of your 5 historical places, hopefully I'm saying this right, Sedavavaaki. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things for all of us to realize is pretty much anywhere you walk within the core of Phoenix is historic and in many cases very sacred ground for the Huhugam. The piece that is left is Sudafvaaki, formerly known as Pueblo Grande, and they actually have a number of structures, the adobe structures that go all the way back. Well, the Huhugam were here up until about the year 1400 AD. So we're going back 800 and some years for those structures that are there. So I always encourage people, we talk about Central and Washington and the original streets and those kinds of things, but if you really want to experience where the valley as a whole began, go out to Sudafvaaki and walk those grounds where the prehistoric Huhugam walked.
And we can actually go out there and walk around today?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know what the admission fee is, but the staff there is tremendous. You can get a personal tour of 4 of the original canals that are still in place. And yes, it's a city landmark. It's just one of the gems. And when we correlate Phoenix with history, that was the beginning of our history, really, right there.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. It was interesting to learn more about the historical locations here in the valley and what we can learn more about how we've evolved and grown throughout the decades and centuries here in the valley. So, Steve, thanks again for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure, Gabe. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. And thanks again for watching this. If you want to learn more about Phoenix history, be sure to check our website, 12news.com.